Yeah, good morning and welcome to the 15th meeting of Classical Mechanics 1, 16th November 2021. Yeah, I think Siddhant Shah had a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, in this, I'm not understanding what is to do with the third problem of the problem set 6. Like, do we just define a potential V or like?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that.
I mean, V is an arbitrary. Yeah, it's a potential. Yeah, it's some function. So it's an arbitrary function. I mean, f is some force, and it is given as the negative derivative of some function v. Yeah. And then you are supposed to use an appropriate integrating factor to derive a conserved energy. That is the problem to be solved. We did this in one dimension earlier. Yeah, in the class itself, we did it in one dimension. Now we are doing it in 3 dimensions. That is the only difference.
Sir, so in the end, do we have to like the defining the conserved energy is the entire point of this problem?
You may have some idea of what the energy is, but you are supposed to.
No, derivation, yes, but
yeah,
in the end, the conclusion is the conserved energy.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Is that clearer as to what is required?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Ankit, are you connected? Ankit Yadav?
Yes, sir. Now I'm connected.
Okay, good.
I was not able to hear.
Fine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So any other questions before we get started? I want to just recall one thing from last time and clarify. This was concerning motion of a particle in a potential. So let me first share my screen. Okay, so in fact, I had 2 things to do before that. There were some queries about question 3 in problem set 4. So let me just recall what that was. This was about a particle moving on a sphere. So you have a sphere here, a particle of mass m. And we were asked how many degrees of freedom this system has. So it's a fixed sphere. The sphere is not moving. So this has 2 degrees of freedom. Yeah, I mean, any particle moving on a surface, doesn't have to be a sphere, could be the surface of my palm. Any surface has 2 degrees of freedom. It could be a hyperboloid, could be an ellipsoid surface, doesn't matter. 2 degrees of freedom. You need two real numbers to specify the initial or even instantaneous initial location of the particle. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, basically, it can move, and the two degrees of freedom, you can choose them in many ways. You could choose them as latitude and longitude. Yeah, that would be a fine way to locate the particle. You say on which latitude it is and on which longitude it is. And that is a way of specifying its location. You could use spherical polar coordinates, namely the polar angle theta and the azimuthal angle phi. That was another option. Of course, these coordinate systems may break down or be non-unique specifications at some isolated locations, like the North Pole. Yeah, but leaving that issue aside, you need 2 degrees of freedom. You need two real numbers to specify the instantaneous location of the particle. Mass is not one of them. Yeah, you don't need to specify the mass to locate the particle. The mass of the particle is specified for you. And then we were asked how many pieces of initial data. Yeah, so initial conditions to solve Newton's equation. Well, you need 4 pieces of initial data. Yeah, amounting to the initial position and velocity. So here we could choose them to be theta, phi, theta dot, and phi dot. So this would be a fine specification of initial conditions. Or you could choose the latitude, longitude, rate of change of latitude and rate of change of longitude, give them some symbols. Yeah, acceleration is not an initial condition. Yeah, Newton's equation determines the acceleration in terms of the force. So, and it is a second order equation. So Newton's second law is second order. You need location and velocity as initial conditions. Mass is not an initial condition. Yeah. Yeah, some of you have suggested to use x and y and x dot and y dot as initial conditions. Well, this is, I mean, it's not far off, but x and y, meaning the coordinates on the horizontal plane. Yeah, if you do specify such a point, on the xy plane, it determines 2 points on the surface of the sphere, one sort of above and one below, on the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. Yeah, northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. So it is not a complete specification. Yeah, so not quite a complete. So x and y do not provide a complete specification of location on the sphere. Yeah. So any question about this problem? Okay. I emphasize again that acceleration is not an initial condition, and neither is mass. I mean, this is generally true, not specific to this problem. Okay, so let me now go back to where we were last time. And any question about what we just discussed? Okay. If not, we will, yeah, just a second. I need to check on TAs. Okay, fine. Yeah, so last time we were speaking about conserved quantities. We had defined what we meant by dynamical variables. Yeah, and a dynamical variable was simply a function of position and momentum components. Yeah. So in general, that is what we mean by dynamical variable. Position components like x, y, z, or theta, phi are themselves dynamical variables. Mass is not a dynamical variable. Mass of a particle is not a dynamical variable. Neither is the charge of a particle. Neither is the force constant of a spring. Yeah, these are all not dynamical variables. Okay, and we mentioned that a conserved quantity is one that is a conserved quantity is a dynamical variable that is constant along every trajectory. So constant along every trajectory. So they are time independent quantities, but they are functions of position and momentum. Mass may also be time independent, but we don't call it a conserved quantity because it's not a dynamical variable in the first place. Okay, now we looked at the utility of conserved quantities, and I mentioned that they help us solve or understand Newton's equations for the trajectory. Looked at an example, a particle moving on a line subject to a conservative force. Yeah, in this case, Newton's equation, second order equation of motion, is mx double dot is equal to minus v prime of x. The motion is along a line. It is conventional not to put vector symbols like arrows above x and above x or the force, because these are just real numbers, because motion is along a straight line. Now, this equation can be reduced to a first order equation stating the conservation of energy. Yeah, and that was this equation, E equal to half mx dot squared plus v of x. And now that it is a first order equation, we can take x dot to one side and everything else to the other side. That's what we've done here. This is called a separation of variables. Yeah. Well, it's not quite done here. It is in the next step that variables have been separated, namely x's are all on one side and t's are all on the other side. Then it is easy to integrate, at least formally. So you have that dt is equal to dx upon square root of 2 upon m e minus v of x. Yeah, so this is what we mean by separation of variables, t on one side, x on the other side. And now we are ready to integrate. And upon integrating, you get that is from t naught to t, and at t naught, particle is at x of t naught is x naught. Yeah, so this is the assumption, and we are integrating from t naught to t, in which time the particle goes from x naught to x. Now, since there was a square root, actually I should have put plus or minus sign here. We have a plus minus sign here. I think now let me remember who asked. One of us. Yeah, Bijay and Rai, I think, asked about the plus minus sign. Both of them referred to forward time evolution. If this was not clear last time, I want to emphasize once again, both of them refer to forward time evolution. T is greater than T naught in both cases. It is just that the plus sign is reserved for the case where x is greater than x naught, namely when the particle moves to the right. And the minus sign is reserved to the case where x is less than x naught, so that the particle moves to the left. In both cases, the right-hand side is actually a positive number. So the thing is, the particle could move to the right or to the left. The appearance of plus minus doesn't mean the result is negative in either case. Is that okay, Bijayan?
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Yeah, got it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, we of course illustrated this with a picture, which is very good to have in mind. And let me go to that. Um, I don't want to confuse this with the negative evolution in backward time. That is also a worthy thing to consider. But that is no different from this. You could consider the backward time evolution, and there would still be two ways to go. Yeah. But anyway, let us not bring in backward time evolution just yet. Okay. So I just want to illustrate this pictorially. The picture to have in mind is that the particle is moving on the horizontal line x with coordinate, instantaneous coordinate x. Now it starts somewhere, that is the initial location. It has some energy. As a consequence, now if that energy is more than the potential energy at that location, yeah, so I plotted the potential energy for this system, for this particle, the potential function v of x. Okay, I'm sorry, I have some question. I have a question from Soham Chatterjee asking whether a modulus sign would be more appropriate instead of negative sign. Okay, this is a relevant question. If you wish, I mean, a modulus sign is not needed over here. The formula stated here is correct, I believe. If you really wished, you could put an absolute value sign around the integral, but that would, I mean, I think, I mean, around the whole thing, but that would, I think, confuse the matter. It is true that the whole thing is positive, but it is important to keep in mind that there are two ways in which it can be positive. So I would prefer not to put an absolute value sign for this whole thing. Is Soham satisfied? Okay, yeah, he says fine. Yeah, so I think it is well worth keeping the plus minus over there. They have two distinct physical meanings, which we are just illustrating here. So if the particle's energy is more than the potential at that point, at that location, then the particle has kinetic energy, yeah. And therefore it has a non-zero initial velocity, which is given by this formula. The initial velocity yeah, and the point is that that too has two possible signs corresponding to the two possibilities of either rightward or leftward movement from that initial location. Now there are exceptions. If the initial location is at one of these extremes where the energy is equal to the potential energy, total energy is equal to the potential energy, yeah, over here or over here, then the initial velocity over here what is the initial velocity if the particle begins either here or here?
It should be 0.
You are right. May I know who spoke up?
Shubham Kumar.
Shubham Kumar, fine. Yes, it is 0. Let me make sure everybody follows why. If I simply use this formula and assume that E is equal to V of x naught, that is the energy of the particle is equal to the potential at the initial location, then this quantity is as 0. Yeah, so then V of T naught is equal to 0. Of course, if you are wondering where this formula came from, well, it came from the condition E is equal to half m v squared plus v of x. Yeah, this is velocity, that is potential. And I simply solve for v by taking it to the other side. So I will get v squared is equal to 2 upon m e minus v of x. Yeah, and then we take a square root to put plus minus sign and then evaluate at x equal to x naught. Okay, so this is how the initial velocity is obtained. If you are at the extremes, then the particle has only one way to go. I mean, either left over here or right over here. And in that case, there is only one solution. The plus minus signs go away. Yeah, is that clear, this exceptional case? In that case, physically what is happening is that the particle is starting from rest and the force is pushing it towards the left, and it goes along. It'll keep going along. When it reaches the left end point, it will come to rest once again because the energy is exactly equal to the potential at this point. It will come instantaneously to rest and then turn around. For this reason, those extremes are called turning points of the potential. Okay, so the points x0 where E is equal to V of x0 are called turning points. Okay, perhaps I should not call them x0, I should call them xTP. So when E is equal to V of xTP, xTP is called a turning point. Okay. So our conclusion then, I mean, among other things, is that the specification of energy and initial location by themselves are not a complete specification of the instantaneous state of the particle. Okay, knowing initial location and initial momentum or initial velocity completely specifies the initial state of the particle. But giving the energy and initial location is not a complete specification because that energy may allow for two initial velocities. Yeah, so initial position and momentum is a complete specification of initial state. Yeah, and let me emphasize again that knowledge of the initial state allows you to solve Newton's equation and deduce the future evolution of the system. Yeah, so knowledge of initial state is just what you need. It is adequate, just what you need. Needed to solve Newton's second law and find the trajectory. Okay, so this is the story. Any question about this? All right. If not, I want to devote a little bit of time now, some of this lecture, to another illustration of the use of conserved quantities, but in a very different context, namely in the context of collisions or scattering of particles. Okay, so a brief introduction to what we mean by that. Yeah. So we will now illustrate the use of conserved quantities, and the conserved quantities we have in mind here are mass, momentum, and energy in the context of collisions. Okay. So what do we mean by this? By a collision of point particles, we shall mean an interaction among particles that are far separated in the far past, that is in the asymptotic past, as well as in the far future, so that each of them has a constant velocity as t goes to either plus or minus infinity. Okay, so the picture is as follows. You have particles coming in from far away let us suppose there are 2 over here. Then they get closer. In the asymptotic past, they have straight line trajectories. They get closer. Well, maybe there is some force between them. Maybe they repel each other. So their trajectories will no longer be straight lines, get bent somehow or the other, but eventually find their ways away. And in the asymptotic future, they again follow straight line trajectories. Okay, so this is an example of a collision or scattering of 2 particles. Yeah, I mean, billiard balls would also work. In that case, they would actually come into contact. They are not point particles, but that's okay. Yeah. Now, why is it okay to assume that the particles have straight line trajectories in the far past and far future? Well, this is a reasonable approximation if the forces between the particles are sufficiently short-ranged so that particles behave as free particles when they are separated by distances large compared to the range of the forces. Okay, so we have in mind particles that feel some forces, but those forces don't extend indefinitely far away. Okay, when the separations become large, the forces die out, is the assumption, and this is borne out in most contexts. Yeah, gravitational forces decrease with distance, so do electric forces. Yeah, I mean, there are places where one has to be a bit careful, but by and large, this is true. Forces between molecules also tend to fall off pretty fast. Yeah. So that far away in the asymptotic future and in the far past, they can be assumed to be coming along straight line trajectories at constant velocity. So examples of collisions include 2 particles may collide. See, when I say collision, it doesn't mean they come into contact. Yeah, that is only one special case. Collision does not mean particles come into contact. Yeah, they may, but they may not. Depends on the nature of the forces. So 2 particles may collide, each suffering a deflection in direction of motion. So that is the picture I drew over here. That is one possibility. A single particle may sort of disintegrate or decay into 2 or more particles. I mean, this is something that happens with unstable particles in particle physics. So you may have a particle coming in and then sort of spontaneously decay into several particles, maybe 3 in this case. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm giving some general possibilities. Now, 2 or more particles may coalesce and sort of form a bound state. So you may have a collision between 2 particles coming in, and then they form some kind of a molecule to join together and form some sort of molecule. Yeah. Now, we are not obliged to have only 2 particles coming in. You could have 3 coming in, 5, etc. But the point is, I hope these examples illustrate that though the particle number need not be conserved, I mean, it often is, but it need not be conserved. Collisions may be fruitfully treated using conservation laws of mass, momentum, and energy. Okay. Even without a detailed knowledge of the forces of interaction. Okay, so if you know the force of interaction, you will try to solve the equations of motion, trying to find the trajectories. Yeah, and that is a very interesting problem. But here we address the question, what can we say, even if we don't know the forces between the particles, but based purely on some conservation laws? It turns out that a fair bit can be said. Not everything, but some things can be said. So what are these conservation laws? Let us begin with the first, which is conservation of mass. By mass, I mean the inertial mass. So mass, well, intuitively regarded as the amount of matter is conserved in non-relativistic mechanical processes. Okay, it is neither created nor destroyed. So the total mass of the particles is conserved. Okay, so this is one of the conservation laws we will exploit. The other ones, the conservation of momentum and energy should not come as a surprise. If external forces may be neglected, then the total momentum of a system is conserved. And you have shown this in a specific example in the previous homework set. Yeah. And to do that, I believe you exploited Newton's third law as well, to cancel the contributions of interparticle forces to the computation of the rate of change of total momentum. So if external forces are absent or maybe neglected, then the total momentum of a system is conserved. Okay, so that is what we will assume, that the particles that are colliding are not subject to some external gravity or some external force. They are only subject to their own interparticle forces. Okay. For a system of particles, this is a consequence of Newton's second and third laws, with the latter allowing cancellation of interparticle forces in computing the rate of change of total momentum. Okay, so this is what we just said. The total, so that is as far as mass and momentum conservation are concerned. The total energy of an isolated system is also conserved. Yeah. So an isolated system that is not able to transmit energy to the environment or receive energy from the environment is called isolated in this sense, and its energy is conserved. However, the kinetic energy of the particles in that system need not be conserved. Yeah, it may arise from or be transformed into other types of energy, yeah, while staying within the system. Yeah, for instance, when a particle goes and impinges on a spring, the spring may get compressed, and the kinetic energy of the particle may be then stored in the potential energy of the spring. Okay, so that is a way in which kinetic energy can be converted into potential energy. Yeah, so kinetic energy is not necessarily conserved. Similarly, kinetic energy may get converted into chemical bond energy. In fact, the example of a spring is in some sense also to do with that, because at a microscopic level, the spring contains molecules, and you are storing some energy in those molecular bonds and so on. So, yeah. So, kinetic energy may be transformed into chemical bond energy, or even the opposite way could happen. Yeah, kinetic energy could even be converted into heat, which stays within the system. Yeah, so you will have to account for that. Yeah. So okay. So let us now write down the conservation laws. To be specific, I will write it in some general fashion, but then we will soon specialize to a simple case. So suppose we have, so any questions so far? Okay. So suppose we have a collision among P particles, P incoming particles, and I'm using the letter P for past because they're coming from the far past, incoming particles, resulting in F future outgoing particles. Yeah, F for future. So we have P particles coming in and F particles going out. Just to keep things somewhat general. Yeah, so let the masses and velocities as t goes to minus infinity or plus infinity of the particles be denoted as m1 v1, m2 v2, and so on up to mp vp. Yeah, m1 v1, mp vp. Yeah, so these are the masses and velocities of the incoming particles. Yeah, P of them. And then you have the masses and velocities of the outgoing particles, which would then be denoted as mp plus 1 vp plus 1. Yeah, that is for sort of the first outgoing particle, and so on up to the last one, mp plus f vp plus f. Okay, so this would be one way to label the particle masses and velocities in the far past and in the far future. So this is as t goes to minus infinity, and this is as t goes to plus infinity. At finite times, we don't really know what the velocities are, because they could change with time. As this picture illustrates, the velocities, the particles may bend, the trajectories may bend. So we don't know the velocities at intermediate times. To find out what those velocities are, we will need the forces. Yeah, but we are not said what the forces are precisely now, so we don't address that question. All right. Now, the conservation of mass, the law of conservation of mass states that the sum of incoming particle masses is equal to the sum of outgoing particle masses. Simple as that. M1 through MP added together must be equal to MP plus 1 plus dot 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 plus MP plus F. Okay. So if there's a collision of two particles, then M1 plus M2 must be equal to M3 plus M4. Yeah, where these are the incoming and these are outgoing. Okay. This is the conservation of momentum, sorry, mass. Then we go to conservation of linear momentum in a collision. Now, this is the statement that the total initial momentum of the system of particles is equal to the total final momentum. So M1 V1 plus dot 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 plus MP Vp for all the incoming particles must equal MP plus 1 Vp plus 1 plus dot 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 plus MP plus F Vp plus F. Okay. So this is the law of conservation of momentum, total momentum. Finally, we have the conservation of energy, which we will write in a particular way. The total initial energy is purely kinetic. Bunch of particles coming in. Well, oh, I'm sorry, I should not have said that. It may not be purely kinetic. I am very sorry about that. Yeah, for instance, a particle at rest here could simply decay. Yeah, so then the initial energy would purely be potential. It could decay into 2-3 particles, which then fly away, carrying away that initial potential energy in the form of kinetic energy of motion. Okay, so, but we write the conservation of energy in a following manner, in a particular way. The sum of the initial kinetic energies of the particles is equal to the sum of the final kinetic energies of the particles plus a correction term, which I write as Q. Okay, so if Q was absent, then the initial kinetic energy would equal the final kinetic energy. But we have just discussed that that need not be the case. There is also other forms of energy present, and we put all of that into this quantity Q. Yeah. So Q is the difference Q between initial and final kinetic energies is positive. So let us interpret it. It is positive if kinetic energy in the initial particles gets converted and is stored, for instance, in a compressed spring, or perhaps it is released as heat. Yeah. So the outgoing particles may carry less kinetic energy because some of it has been stored in a spring or has been released as heat, etc. Okay, that is the case if Q is positive. On the other hand, Q is negative if internal potential energy is converted into kinetic energy, for instance, in the decay of a particle that was initially at rest. So this was the other example I gave. Yeah. So the very special case where Q is 0 is called an elastic collision, namely one where the kinetic energy itself is conserved. Yeah. So if the kinetic energy, total initial kinetic energy is equal to the total final kinetic energy, then we call the collision elastic. But even in that case, it is not as though all the individual kinetic energies of particles need not be preserved. Kinetic energy may be redistributed among the particles. Okay, so this is what is meant by an elastic collision. Q is 0 in an elastic collision. So an example of a collision is the elastic 2-to-2 scattering of two particles which retain their identities, including their masses. So can illustrate that with a figure. In fact, it is essentially the same figure as I drew before. You have two incoming particles with masses m1 and m2. Yeah, they interact and go away, asymptotically following straight line trajectories at constant speed, retaining their identities and masses. Okay, so this is in this example, I am trying to convey that this is an elastic 2-to-2 scattering. 2-to-2 simply means two incoming particles, two outgoing particles. Okay. Now I want to look at this case in a little bit more detail now. But before I do that, any question about the setup? All right, then let us proceed. Now, in the case that I just mentioned, where the particles retain their masses and identities, conservation of mass is automatic. Yeah, because m1 plus m2 initial mass is the same as m2 plus m1 final mass. Okay, so conservation of mass is automatic, and we have effectively 4 conservation laws, namely 1 scalar conservation law for energy and 3 conservation laws coming from 3 components of total momentum. So conservation of momentum is not 1 conservation law, it is actually 3 conservation laws. Important to bear that in mind, because momentum has 3 Cartesian components. So what is the sort of problem we are interested in understanding or solving? It may be that we are given the initial velocities v1 and v2. We are given the initial velocities. Then we would then have 4 equations, namely conservation of energy, momentum x, momentum y, momentum z component. And what is your aim? It is to find the velocities of the outgoing particles, v3 and v4. Okay. Now the velocities of the outgoing particles comprise 6 unknowns, because v3 and v4 each has 3 Cartesian components. So you want to find out 6 unknowns. You have only 4 equations. So they are in general insufficient to determine the final velocities. Okay, so purely using conservation of momentum energy will not solve this problem for you. So although you need additional information. So although conservation laws place restrictions on the final velocities, put certain relations, one needs information on the nature of forces to determine the final velocities. Yeah, so you have to accept this. If you put in nothing, you can't be so hopeful of getting out the solution to the problem. You do need to know something about the forces. However, there is one special case, namely the special case of collisions in 1 dimension. Yeah, here things become particularly simple. In 1-dimensional motion, momentum has only 1 component, and we have 2 conservation laws as opposed to 4 conservation laws: conservation of energy and the x component of momentum. Okay, the total total energy and total x component of momentum. These are two conservation laws. And you have only two unknown final velocity components to determine. Yeah, namely V3 and V4. Okay, to find. Yeah, these are just a pair of velocities in one-dimensional motion, a pair of real numbers, and you have two constraints. Yeah, so in this case, the system of equations is even determined. It means that you have as many equations as there are unknowns, then we will call the system of equations even determined. Can you give me a name for a system of equations where the number of unknowns exceeds the number of equations?
It's an undetermined system, right? Like
rather than undetermined, I would like to use the name underdetermined. Yeah. So Anand
yes.
Balivada has given a good term. We'll improve upon it and we will say it is underdetermined. Yeah, underdetermined if the number of equations is less than the number of unknowns. Yeah, so basically you don't have enough equations to solve for all the unknowns. Then we will say that the system of equations is underdetermined. Yeah. Now, can you suggest a name for the opposite case where you have more equations than unknowns?
Oh, in that case, because you said underdetermined, that would be overdetermined.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So
I see now. Yeah. Okay.
Overdetermined. Yeah, overdetermined if number of equations is more than number of unknowns. Yeah. So that is a nice term for that.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I
Yes,
had a
Shubham Kumar.
doubt.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, like if we consider this one-dimensional case, the number of unknowns are equal to the number of equations. And then if we go in 2 dimensions, we'll have one less equation than the number of unknowns. And then if we go in 3 dimensions, it will be 2. Sir, so I mean, physically, why is it happening that, like, how is this
physically
unknowns arising?
It's because in higher dimensions, there is more space to move around. I mean, I'm just giving a very heuristic reason.
Sir,
There's
but
basically
still, I mean, you have more conservation laws also.
Yeah, but the number
Even
of
if you have-
conservation laws doesn't sort of grow fast enough with the number of degrees of freedom. Yeah, see, the number of conservation laws is one for energy and as many components of momentum as the number of dimensions of your space. Yeah, but here the number of unknowns grows a little bit faster because you have two particles going out and each of them has as many components of velocity as there are directions to move in. So it is as simple as that. You have only one total momentum, but you have two particles going out. So you're at a loss. I mean, in a very simple way, that is all there is to it.
Okay, sir. I mean, like, I thought some deep reasoning would be there.
Uh,
I mean, like that we can see from the equations that
Yeah.
they are growing
uh-huh.
somewhere. But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think at this stage, I don't think I would like to suggest any deeper reasoning. That is, the counting is as simple as that. Yeah. I mean, if there is some deeper idea that I would like to suggest, perhaps somewhere else. Yeah. These conservation laws by themselves are not sufficient. You need additional information
okay, sir.
concerning forces or other conservation laws which you may somehow determine. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, and if you have more particles present, the problem becomes even more underdetermined because with every additional particle, you have 3 components of its velocity to be determined. Yeah, so we are just very lucky that if you restrict yourself to 2 final particles, then things are relatively simple, and in one dimension, the system of equations is even determined. Yeah. Okay, so let us look at this case just briefly. Any other question? Okay. Yeah. So let us look at the case of two particle to two particle scattering, elastic scattering. Yeah. So just write down the equations at least. So now if we denote the initial and final, see, instead of calling them V1, V2, V3, V4, it is a little bit simpler to call them V1, V2 as the incoming particle velocities and V1 prime, V2 prime as the outgoing particle velocities. Okay. So the primes denote the final state, and the unprimed denotes the initial state. Then the conservation laws for elastic 2 to 2 scattering become the following pair of equations. I'm thinking of this in one dimension. So just to draw a picture, what we have is a particle coming in, another particle coming in. This may have mass m1, mass m2, v1, v2. I mean, this is a kind of idealized situation. They're point particles moving along a line. This may be the situation. They come, they may have some force between them. They may not come into contact. They may arrive at some point of closest approach and then turn back. Okay, may turn back with some velocity v2 prime, and turn back velocity here may be v1 prime. The masses are retained. So this would be one possible collision. Yeah. Another possibility is that they may sort of pass through each other. They may collide and go back. There are many possibilities. Yeah, passing through each other is a kind of idealization. I mean, that you can talk about with point particles. Yeah, I mean, but at least one can consider such possibilities. Yeah. So what are the conservation laws in this case? The conservation of momentum, linear momentum, total linear momentum, which I will denote by the letter P. It's a conserved quantity here, is given by M1. I am sorry, this was M1 V1. Yeah, that was a mistake. M1 V1 plus M2 V2 is equal to M1 prime, M1 and V1 prime plus M2 V2 prime. V1 prime, V2 prime are the velocities after the collision. Yeah, 1 second. I have to admit. 1 second. How do I do this? One second. I have. Yeah. Okay. So coming back to where we were, I remind you that I have written down the conservation of momentum for a scattering of two particles in one dimension. The total initial linear momentum is equal to the total final linear momentum. Second, because we assume this is an elastic collision, elastic scattering, the total initial kinetic energy is equal to the total final kinetic energy, which I shall denote by the letter T, capital T for kinetic energy. So half m1 v1 squared plus half m2 v2 squared is equal, that's the initial kinetic energy. And then here you have the final kinetic energy. Half m1 v1 prime squared plus half m2 v2 prime squared. Okay, so here is our pair of equations. We have just two equations, and what we have in mind is that v1 and v2 are given. Yeah, and v1 prime, v2 prime to be found. Yeah, so we have two unknowns, one-dimensional motion, two unknowns and two equations. So the system is even determined, and one can ask, can you solve this system of two equations? And it turns out you can. I will spare you the details here, but I strongly urge you to work out this solution. And how does one go about it? See, V1 prime is an unknown. So you can use the first equation, namely conservation of momentum, to eliminate it in favor of V2 prime. Yeah, basically eliminate V1 prime in favor of V2 prime, and the conserved quantity P. Okay. So remember, our main objective here was to illustrate the use of conserved quantities to solve mechanical problems, and that is precisely what we are doing. There are two conserved quantities here, namely P and T, whose values are determined by initial conditions. Yeah. So the value of P is determined by the initial state, namely the initial velocities. Masses are all fixed. Similarly, the formula or the value of T is determined by initial kinetic energy. Okay, so those are all given to us. And now we have written a formula for V1 prime in terms of V2 prime. Yeah, and suppose we denote by capital M the total mass of the particles, then one can put this in the second equation, put this V1 prime in the second equation, and we'll get a quadratic. Yeah, after all, kinetic energy is quadratic in velocity, so you'll get a quadratic for V2 prime, and I have used the quadratic formula to solve for it. I have not written the details here, but it is very instructive to do this. As expected, because the quadratic equation, you expect to get two solutions, and that is what you get. There's a plus or minus sign here. So here is the formula for V2 prime. It is written in terms of the total energy, total kinetic energy, and total momentum of the system. All right. Of course, the masses of the particle also appear. So when one simplifies, you get a formula for V2 prime. It's very interesting to see what the two solutions are like. So one of them I will call the non-trivial solution. So it is some complicated formula which one can interpret. There is another solution where V2 prime is simply V2. Okay. So let us first discuss the second case. That is, if V2 prime is equal to V2, then V1 prime is also equal to V1. Yeah, that is, you just look at this formula and put it there. You will discover that V1 prime is equal to V1. So one possibility that we have discovered is that the particles basically retain their velocities. Yeah. So the equations admit this trivial solution. Yeah. And physically, what does this correspond to? Could someone describe it?
Sir, it corresponds to the case where one of the particle has an opposite velocity to other, and they do not collide with each other. I mean, they just go as they are going.
Okay.
Like V1 is the...
Right. The particles retain their velocities. Of course, it depends how this initial state was. It could be that they were flying apart to begin with and simply keep on flying apart. Yeah, but that is not, that is one possibility, of course. Another possibility is that they were suffering a head-on collision. But in this idealized setup, there are some sort of point particles which simply pass through each other. Yeah, so this one passed through that and that one passed through this. And yeah, they did not see each other at all. Yeah, so that is one solution to these scattering equations. It is what you would call the trivial solution. So that was Shubham, am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I don't know if you had this in mind, but the possibility of the particles simply passing through each other undeflected, without feeling each other at all, is one of the possibilities. Which the equations at least permit that solution. It is a different question whether physically it is reasonable for such a thing to happen. Do these particles, are these really point particles or not? Those are separate questions. But setting aside that trivial solution, we have also a non-trivial solution where V2 prime is given by this formula in terms of the initial velocities V1 and V2. Okay, so without actually working it out, one doesn't have adequate insight into what this means. But I will pose a question through which one can understand this better. So as I said, in the first case, the scattering is called non-trivial, while in the second case, the scattering is trivial. Okay, so this is here pass through undeflected. Yeah, when I say undeflected, without feeling each other. I'm not using the term very precisely. Yeah. Now it turns out, if one asks for some physical phenomenon here, for instance, let us suppose that the particles had equal and opposite initial velocities. Okay, head-on collision, equal and opposite initial velocities. That is, v1 is equal to minus v2. Equal and opposite initial velocities. Geometrically, the setup is this way. Then it is possible to show by putting the values in here that the heavier particle, I mean, they have different masses, m1, v1, v2, and m2. Okay, so we will suppose that they have different masses, not necessarily equal. It is possible to show that the heavier particle, by that I mean the more massive particle, comes to rest after the collision if it is thrice as massive as the lighter one. Okay, so this is just a little fact that one can deduce from this formula. Okay, and I encourage you to do that. Yeah, so if you have a collision between two billiard balls, one which is thrice as massive as the other, head-on collision with incoming speeds being equal and oppositely directed velocities, then the heavier ball will basically come to rest, and the lighter one will recoil. And you are encouraged to find its speed, the recoil speed. Yeah, so this is just there is nothing special about this particular setup, but it is nice to try to work it out. So any question about the principles we have used and the overall procedure? Okay. So the main message is that conserved quantities are useful. Yeah. So this is the main message. So I can write it as a slogan: conserved. See, we have deduced a physical fact that heavier particle will come to rest if it is 3 times as massive as the lighter one. I mean, I did not know this before trying this out. Yeah. So conserved quantities are useful in understanding dynamics of a mechanical system. So this is a very important theme in physics, that conserved quantities and their utility. Okay, any question about this? Okay, if not, I want to make some more remarks about motion in one dimension. We have said some things, a few more remarks. Just to recapitulate, let us consider a particle of mass m, which is positive, inertial mass m, moving on the real line, yeah, with instantaneous position x of t. Yeah. So motion in one dimension is simple in many ways, though some of the features that we will study about one-dimensional motion are valid more generally. Okay, so it has some validity, I mean some use, even if one wants to study higher dimensional motion. Yeah, there are many problems in higher dimensions which, using some symmetries, can be reduced to one-dimensional motion. Okay, so it is quite helpful in that respect. Now, just to clarify once again, a particle moving on a line is said to possess 1 degree of freedom, since precisely one coordinate, one real number x, is needed to specify its location instantaneously or at the initial time. Yeah. A particle moving on a circle or other curve also has precisely 1 degree of freedom. Yeah, a fixed circle or a fixed curve. Suppose you have a fixed curve here and a particle that moves along it, that too has 1 degree of freedom. Now we will call such a particle a free particle if it is isolated from physical influences. In other words, no forces act on it. This is all just a review of what you are well aware of. In this case, Newton's first law in an inertial frame states that it must either be at rest or moving at constant velocity, x dot. And this could be either towards the right or towards the left. On the other hand, if a force F acts on it, Newton's second law says that the particle accelerates according to the equation of motion, F is equal to mx double dot. Okay, so these are all standard things. Now, to find the trajectory of the particle, we need to solve this second order differential equation subject to a pair of initial conditions. So these initial conditions could be taken as the initial position and the initial velocity. Now, if the force depends only on location, namely F is a function of x alone, then in one dimension, we may define a potential function such that F is equal to minus v prime of x by the negative antiderivative or primitive of F. Yeah, so it's an integral of F. Yeah. Now, for a conservative force, Newton's equation becomes mx double dot plus v prime equal to 0. Yeah, and as we did last time, you can use the integrating factor to get a conserved quantity, which is simply half mx dot squared plus v of. Yeah, so this dynamical variable is called energy. Energy half mx dot squared plus v of x, and this is the energy. The total energy, which is a sum of kinetic and potential energies. Yeah. Now, with this setup, which is already familiar to us, that is why I went through it quickly, I want to describe some qualitative features of one-dimensional motion. Yeah. So again, I want to exploit this conserved energy. So let us suppose we have a conserved energy. Having a conserved energy is helpful in understanding the dynamics. Okay, let us illustrate this once again. Indeed, for a given energy, the nature of the motion can be deduced from a graph of the potential v of x. Okay, so let us go through this in the remaining few minutes. On account of the positivity of kinetic energy, so kinetic energy is half mx dot squared, so this is greater than or equal to 0. And since E is equal to half m x dot squared plus v of x, we then conclude that E minus v of x must be greater than or equal to 0, because this quantity is equal to the kinetic energy, which is half m x dot squared. Okay, so E minus v must be positive. This inequality must always be satisfied, E greater than or equal to v of x. Okay, so now one can look at the possible values of x on the real line where this inequality is satisfied given your potential function. Okay, so let us take an example. So first of all, a set of x's where energy exceeds potential energy when it is non-empty. Yeah, it may be empty, there may be no point. Yeah, but when it is non-empty, it may be the union of several intervals or points, etc. Okay, so let us look at this example. Here is an example. Particle is moving on this line, the x-axis. I have plotted here the potential that the particle sees. Okay, it's very important to understand the particle is moving on this line, yeah, not somewhere else. I have plotted on the vertical direction the potential function v of x. Yeah, I've just taken some general potential which I have concocted Yeah. And we suppose that initial conditions are such that the energy of the particle is given by this value. Okay. Let us suppose that is the case. Yeah. Now, any question about our setup? So let us see what the possible types of motion this particle can display, given that the energy is so much. A lot of it is determined by initial conditions, of course, but there are various possibilities here. Now, for instance, the particle cannot be located at the point with coordinate 1, because at the point 1, the potential exceeds the value of E. Okay, so particle can't be here. Can't be here. Okay, so the condition E minus V positive must not be violated. If it is violated, then the particle simply cannot be there. Okay, so the particle can never be here. However, in this region, the particle can be found because the energy exceeds the potential. Okay, so the particle can be found here. I chose my energy just so that it's equal to the height of this potential. So the particle can also be found at the point x6, that is this point. Yeah, point x6. Particle cannot be found over here because there the energy is less than the potential. Particle can be found at x4 because the energy is exactly equal to the potential there. Okay, so I would like you to tell me what kind of dynamics a particle that is initially at x4 will display from this picture.
Sir, if I'm understanding it right, it can't move anywhere.
Exactly. The particle cannot move there. So we will say, yes, if it starts there, what must its initial velocity be?
0.
Yes, it has to be 0 because the energy was equal to the potential. So x4 is called a static solution. That is, x of t is identically equal to x4. Okay, particle begins at x4, remains at x4 at all times. It's called a static solution. Yeah, particle simply doesn't move. Tell me similarly, if the particle began at x6, what it would do?
It would also stay at rest.
Correct. It would have to start at rest because the energy was equal to potential, so no velocity present initially, and the particle would remain at rest. Okay, so that is another static solution. Now, physically, can you give me some intuition as to how these two static solutions are different?
One is in stable position, other is in unstable.
Precisely, you are right. Now, stability is a concept we have not studied in any detail or even introduced precisely, but I hope the picture indicates to you what's happening. If the particle is initially at x6, a small perturbation due to somebody blowing on it or some additional force coming in would allow the particle to move either to the left or to the right. Okay, and that is pictorially illustrated and colloquially said that the particle could roll down this hill. I mean, the particle is not on a hill at all. The particle is on the like a hill, and that is why we say the particle can roll down the hill. But it's very important to bear in mind the particle is located on a line of equilibrium. So these two static solutions are both points of equilibrium where the particle is at rest and remains at rest, but one is an unstable stable equilibrium solution. All right. Any question about that? In other words, if the particle is here, the potential is such that a small perturbation the potential will exert a force on the particle that restores it to its original location. Yeah, so here the force is restoring, but here the force is not restoring. So that's why it's unstable. So the picture already tells you the nature of the stability of the static solutions. Now let us go to this other possibility where the initial conditions were such that the particle is somewhere between x2 and x3. Yeah, in that case, can you tell me, suppose the particle begins over here. Yeah, particle begins here. Is the initial velocity 0 or non-zero? Please tell me.
Sir, it is non-zero.
It is indeed non-zero, Swaminathan Rajagopalan. Yeah, so the initial velocity has to be non-zero because the energy at that point exceeds the potential energy, because potential energy is much less. So the remaining has to be in kinetic energy, and therefore it has to be a non-zero velocity. Now that velocity could be rightward directed or leftward directed. Both are possible. Depends on initial conditions. Now, suppose it is rightward directed, the particle will start moving rightward. Please tell me, will the particle speed up or slow down?
For rightward, it will slow down.
And for leftward?
It will slow down again.
Both
Will
ways.
slow
Yeah.
down again.
Yeah, the speed will decrease because the potential energy is increasing, potential is going up, so kinetic energy has to come down. It's going to slow down. And since you are all becoming adept at this, as it reaches the point x3, what does the speed approach?
Zero.
0. Yeah. So at x3, speed is 0. So the particle will instantaneously come to rest at x3. And then what will it do?
It will
It will
come
come
back.
down again.
Yeah, it's going to turn around. Okay, I mean, we are just giving intuition here. We're not writing equations. One can write the equation and solve it, but I want us to have the physical intuition, at least at this stage. The particle, and that is called a turning point. Yeah, the particle would come instantaneously to rest, momentarily to rest, turning point, momentarily at rest. Yeah, and basically turn around and come back here and do roughly the same thing, reach the left end point, where again it comes instantaneously to rest and turns around. So what kind of motion will this particle display? Please give some descriptive name for this.
Oscillatory motion.
Yeah, indeed. So here we have oscillatory motion. Okay. So at x4, we had stationarity, nothing happening, static solution. Here we have oscillatory motion. I would like to call this oscillatory motion bound motion. Yeah, bound because the particle is bound to that region. It cannot go beyond x3 to the right and beyond x2 to the left. Okay, so this is called a bound trajectory. To make a contrast, okay, I have to stop here, but just to make a contrast, let us consider this final case where the energy is so much and the potential function is like this. Okay, here the particle, suppose it started over here and came rightward. Yeah, can somebody describe what kind of motion it is going to display?
So
Yeah,
if it comes rightwards,
Yes.
its velocity will slow down.
Yes,
Then it will turn.
yes.
Then just go to.
Yeah, suppose the
infinity.
potential just goes down to 0 or something like that. Yeah, yeah, indeed. The particle will keep moving out leftwards. And if the potential just dies out and goes to 0, the particle will have no reason to stop and will maintain its speed. Eventually, it will reach some asymptotic speed and escape out to escape to minus infinity. Okay, so we would call this an unbound trajectory. Yeah, this is an unbound trajectory. It has scattered against a potential. Yeah, it came in from infinity, scattered against a potential barrier, and went out back to infinity. Okay, so that is the story here. We went through this a bit quickly, but I hope at least intuitively it is plausible as to how this is happening. Any question about this?
So
Yes.
if on the left, if the
Yes.
potential goes to 0 at some finite point,
Okay.
and then
So
the energy becomes constant.
yeah, energy is always constant. Energy is conserved. Yeah.
No, I mean so then the kinetic energy becomes constant,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
the derivative of the kinetic energy becomes 0.
Yes.
But the derivative of kinetic energy is, oh no, it's velocity times acceleration. That's my bad.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Fine. Okay. Sorry, who was speaking? Romit. Is it?
And that was Romit. I thought
Romit.
that the velocity would become 0, but that's not true.
No, the velocity will reach its asymptotic value at finite time. That is what you are saying. Because the potential has simply become 0. And the particle will simply go leftward on its merry way. Any other questions? Yeah, so I encourage you to draw such a picture for yourself, indicate an energy, and describe for yourself what possible motions the particle could describe. Okay, so that is a nice, and try to recover all those cases that we just now described. There is one case which I have not described in any detail, which is what happens over here. So I encourage you to think about that. Yeah. Okay, any other question?
So could you scroll up a bit?
Yes. Yeah.
So the page about this.
Oh, the previous page. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So here, like while we were defining potential V of x, won't we have to say it is V of x minus V of 0, because we haven't said
Very
anything.
right. You are quite right. There is a big reason why I didn't do such things, because I didn't want to tell things I should not tell. But you are quite right. V of x minus V of 0 is equal to this formula. You're quite right. Yeah, my formula was incorrect. But for obvious reasons, I was trying not to say such things. Is that okay, Ishita?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, excellent. Any other question? Yeah, this is something I want you to discuss in the homework. That is why I was trying to avoid discussing it here, but I have been forced to do so. Okay. Any other question? All right. If not, let us stop this discussion here and meet on Thursday. Thank you for your attention and all the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.